Malala Yousafzai was born in Mingora, the largest town in Pakistan's beautiful Swat Valley. The valley was known for its lush green mountains, flowing rivers, and a culture full of poetry and tradition. To outsiders, it seemed like a paradise. But behind the beauty, there were struggles too: political tensions, poverty, and inequality. In this setting, Malala began her life. Her father, Ziauddin Yousafzai, was a teacher and an outspoken believer in the power of education. He ran a school and worked hard to give children, especially girls, a chance to study. In a society where many thought education was only for boys, he boldly challenged traditions. From the beginning, Malala was inspired by his courage. She often sat by him during his speeches and listened as he told others that books were more powerful than guns, and that knowledge was the only way to truly change lives. At home, Malala grew up surrounded by love, curiosity, and hope. Her father treated her not just as a daughter but as a student and a friend. He gave her the confidence to speak freely and to ask questions. Her mother, Tua Pakai, though less educated, supported her with quiet strength and kindness. Together, they built a family atmosphere where learning was celebrated. Malala's story was not just about her. It was about a family that dared to dream differently in a place where those dreams were often silenced. Little did anyone know, this young girl from the Swat Valley would one day become a symbol of courage for the entire world. From a very young age, Malala loved learning. While other children played outside for hours, she found joy in holding a pencil and filling her notebooks with words. Her school, run by her father, was like a second home to her. She would walk through the doors with a smile, eager to sit in class, listen to her teachers, and raise her hand with answers. Books were treasures in her eyes. Every page carried the promise of a brighter tomorrow. Unlike many girls in her community, Malala was fortunate. In Swat Valley, it was common for girls to be kept at home, expected to cook, clean, and prepare for marriage at a young age. Many families believed girls did not need education, that sending them to school was a waste of time and money. Malala, however, could not accept this idea. She often wondered why boys and girls were treated so differently, and why something as simple as education was seen as a privilege instead of a basic right. Her father played a huge role in shaping this thinking. He always reminded her that her mind was just as sharp as any boy's and that her dreams mattered. Malala began to imagine herself not just as a student, but as a leader, someone who could use knowledge to change her world. She wanted to become a doctor at first, to heal people and serve her community, but over time, she began to realize her true calling was bigger than any single career. Every day, as she carried her books to class, she carried something else inside her too, a deep belief that education was the key to freedom. That belief, planted like a seed in her young heart, was slowly growing stronger. And soon, that belief would be tested by forces that wanted to take it all away. As Malala grew older, the peace of the Swat Valley began to fade. A militant group called the Taliban started to gain power in the region. At first, they appeared in small numbers, speaking loudly about religion and rules. Slowly, their presence turned darker. They carried weapons, patrolled the streets, and announced strict orders. What frightened people most was their attitude toward women and girls. According to them, girls should stay home, cover their faces, and never attend school. The Taliban began burning schools at night. Smoke would rise from the ashes of classrooms where children once laughed and learned. Parents grew terrified. Rumors spread that if girls were caught going to school, they would be punished or even killed. Many families, fearing for their daughters' safety, decided to keep them home. The sound of pencils scratching on paper was replaced by silence. In just a short time, hundreds of schools in Swat were destroyed, and thousands of girls lost their right to learn. But Malala was different. She loved her books too much to give them up. Even when walking to school became dangerous, she refused to stop. She hid her notebooks under her shawl so no one would notice. She sat in class, knowing that at any moment the Taliban might strike. Fear lived in her valley, but in her heart, courage began to grow stronger. For Malala, the question was simple: why should anyone decide what a girl can or cannot do? That thought gave her strength. She realized that the fight was not just for herself but for every girl whose dreams were being stolen. And so, even in the shadow of danger, Malala's light did not fade, it only grew brighter. When most people in Swat Valley stayed silent out of fear, Malala found her voice. At just 11 years old, she began writing an anonymous diary for the BBC under the name Gul Mackay. Each night, by the dim light of a lamp, she described what it felt like to live under Taliban rule. She wrote about girls hiding their books under their clothes, about classrooms reduced to rubble, about the fear that filled every street. She confessed her worries too: the sound of gunshots at night, the whispers of parents wondering if school was worth the risk. Her words, simple yet powerful, reached far beyond Pakistan. People in other countries read her blog and realized what was happening in Swat. For the first time, the world could see the struggles of young girls who only wanted to learn. Malala's diary gave them a voice. Though no one knew her true identity yet, she was already becoming a symbol of resistance. Soon, Malala began to speak more openly. She gave interviews, appeared on television, and stood proudly next to her father at education events. Her voice was calm but firm, filled with a wisdom far beyond her years. "How dare the Taliban take away my right to education?" she would ask. It was a question that echoed not just through Swat Valley, but around the globe. But with each word she spoke, the danger around her grew. The Taliban noticed her defiance. To them, she was no longer just a schoolgirl, she was a threat. And while her courage lifted many hearts, it also painted a target on her back. Malala's courage did not grow in isolation. Her father, Ziauddin Yousafzai, was her greatest inspiration and ally. He had long been a critic of the Taliban, speaking out at public gatherings, organizing meetings, and refusing to let extremists silence the dream of education. While many men in the valley feared for their lives and stayed quiet, Ziauddin kept raising his voice, believing that silence would only strengthen the oppressors. Malala admired him deeply. Often, she accompanied her father to community events, sitting in the front row, listening to every word. Sometimes, when the crowd fell silent, she would stand up and speak herself. Her words were not rehearsed, but they carried honesty and power. She would say things like, "Why should I hide my books? Why should I stop learning when boys are still allowed to go to school?" People were surprised by the bravery of such a young girl, yet they were moved by her determination. At school, Malala became more outspoken too. She encouraged her friends not to give up, telling them that their education was worth every risk. She believed knowledge was not just for personal success but for the freedom of her entire community. The Taliban wanted fear to rule Swat Valley, but Malala and her father wanted education to rule instead. Their voices together became symbols of resistance, and news of them began spreading beyond Pakistan. Journalists visited, international organizations took interest, and Malala's name slowly came into the spotlight. But in the eyes of the Taliban, this father and daughter were crossing a dangerous line. And for Malala, the price of her courage was soon to become unbearably high. After the attack, Malala was rushed to a military hospital in Peshawar. Her condition was critical. The bullet had damaged her skull and left her unconscious. Doctors worked tirelessly to remove swelling from her brain and stop the bleeding, but her life hung by a thread. Crowds gathered outside the hospital, praying for her survival. Across Pakistan, people who had never met her lit candles and whispered her name. News agencies carried her story worldwide, and suddenly, a girl from the Swat Valley became the center of global attention. When local doctors realized they could do no more, Malala was airlifted to Birmingham, United Kingdom, for advanced treatment. For days she remained in a coma, her family by her side, not knowing if she would ever wake again. Her father's eyes were heavy with worry, and her mother wept silently, holding her daughter's hand. But Malala was a fighter. Slowly, her body responded, and against all odds, she opened her eyes. The world breathed a sigh of relief. She had survived. Her recovery was long and painful. She underwent multiple surgeries to repair her skull and restore her hearing. The scar on her face became a mark of her sacrifice, but also of her courage. When she spoke again, her voice was softer, but her determination was stronger than ever. Malala realized the bullet that was meant to silence her had, instead, given her story new life. She made a promise to herself: if she had been given a second chance at life, she would not waste it. Her mission to fight for education was no longer just her dream, it was her destiny. When Malala regained her strength, she discovered that the world had been watching her story with awe. Leaders, journalists, and activists from every continent spoke her name. Letters of love and encouragement poured in by the thousands. Strangers who had never known her prayed for her recovery. Malala, once a schoolgirl in Swat Valley, was now a global symbol of courage. Her survival carried a message stronger than any speech. The Taliban had tried to silence her, but instead, they had made her voice impossible to ignore. Invitations came from international organizations, human rights groups, and universities. Yet despite the attention, Malala remained humble. She often said, "I am not a special girl. I am just one of many who want to learn." She wanted the world to see not only her struggle, but the struggles of millions of children still denied education. With her father, she co-founded the Malala Fund, an organization dedicated to ensuring that every child, especially girls, could go to school. Through the fund, she began supporting projects in countries where education was under threat. Malala used her platform not for fame, but for action, standing on the biggest stages in the world and demanding change. Her speeches reached classrooms in Africa, refugee camps in the Middle East, and parliaments in Europe. Everywhere she went, she carried the same message: education is not a privilege, it is a right. Malala's story was no longer only her own, it had become the story of millions whose dreams had been silenced. In 2014, just 2 years after the attack, Malala stood on one of the world's greatest stages, the Nobel Peace Prize ceremony in Oslo, Norway. At only 17 years old, she became the youngest Nobel laureate in history. Dressed in a traditional shalwar kameez with her dupatta draped over her head, she walked confidently to the podium, carrying not just her story but the voices of millions of children who could not be there. In her speech, she reminded the world of a simple truth: one child, one teacher, one book, one pen can change the world. Her words carried the same strength that once filled her diaries in Swat Valley, but now they reached presidents, prime ministers, and leaders sitting before her. She dedicated the award to all children who are denied an education, making it clear that the honor was not only hers, it belonged to every child still fighting to learn. The Nobel Prize elevated Malala's voice even further. She met with world leaders, urging them to invest in schools instead of weapons. She traveled to refugee camps, sitting on the floor with young girls and listening to their dreams. She appeared in classrooms, inspiring children to believe in their power. Her life, once threatened by a single bullet, had transformed into a movement for millions. At 17, Malala had already achieved what many spend a lifetime working toward. But she never saw her Nobel Prize as the end of her journey. To her, it was only the beginning. She now carried not only hope but also responsibility, the responsibility to keep fighting until every child could hold a book and walk through the doors of a school without fear. Even after winning the Nobel Peace Prize, Malala never stopped. She could have chosen a quiet life, safe and comfortable in the United Kingdom, but that was not who she was. Instead, she kept speaking, writing, and traveling, carrying her message to every corner of the globe. Through the Malala Fund, she supported schools in countries torn by war and poverty. She met girls in refugee camps, listened to their fears, and promised to amplify their voices. She reminded the world that millions of children still walked miles each day, not to classrooms, but to fields or factories, robbed of the chance to learn. Her influence reached far beyond speeches. Malala published her memoir, I Am Malala, which inspired young readers everywhere. Universities welcomed her, world leaders sought her advice, and countless children looked up to her as proof that age and circumstance do not limit courage. She showed that bravery is not the absence of fear, but the decision to act despite it. Even as she grew older and pursued higher education at Oxford University, Malala remained grounded in her mission. She often said, I tell my story not because it is unique, but because it is not. To her, the true power of her journey was that it represented the dreams of millions of children whose names the world may never know. Today, Malala continues to fight for a world where every child can hold a book without fear, where no girl is told education is not for her. Her story is not just about survival, it is about transformation. A single bullet tried to end her voice, but instead, it made that voice echo louder than ever, carrying a legacy of courage, equality, and hope for generations to come.